My name is Jack McDougall, and I'm the President and CEO of the Greater Washington Board of Trade. Many of the workers in our area and across the country continued to provide essential services throughout the pandemic, while many others transitioned to work from home, leaving offices empty. Now, as these companies and employees begin planning to return to their offices, what exactly will they be returning to? It's no surprise that many employees have different expectations for their workplace after the pandemic, and flexibility seems to be the emerging theme, the ability to work from home and the office. Companies are working quickly to accommodate these changing attitudes. So now is the time to learn what employees need to feel safe, happy, and productive while at work, and how we can best meet those needs. Steelcase and Arbee Associates are both leading experts in workplace design, and they're with us here today to help understand what will define a great workplace as we continue to recover from the pandemic. They'll be drawing on insights from a recent study of 32,000 people across 10 countries, which will be really interesting. They will also provide a virtual tour of Steelcase's Global Business Center in Grand Rapids, Michigan, to show us some of their cutting-edge designs. So I'm actually looking forward to that one. From Arbee Associates, please welcome Chris Haynes, Chief Operating Officer. And from Steelcase, also please welcome Brian Wilkinson, Regional Vice President of the Mid-Atlantic, along with John Hughes and Dr. Tracy Brower, both principals of applied research and consulting at Steelcase. I want to thank you all for joining us this morning. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Chris to get us started.
Thank you, Jack, and good morning, everyone. As Jack mentioned, my name is Chris Haynes. I'm the COO of Arbee Associates. We're a woman-owned business that provides products and services that optimize space and human performance here in the greater DC area, as well as New Jersey, and we're thrilled to be sharing with you this morning. Our goal here today is to provide a solid framework and tools for you as you think through the best approach for a physical or hybrid return to the workplace. A return that's not only safe and productive, but also engages your employees and strengthens your culture. Informing our discussion today and our recommendations, as Jack mentioned, is a comprehensive body of research recently released by our partner, Steelcase. Steelcase is the world's largest corporate furniture manufacturer with products designed for commercial, government, healthcare, and education environments. And while Steelcase is known for their innovative products, their design process actually begins with the work of a dedicated research team who conducts primary and secondary research around work, workers, and the workplace. And they apply that research directly with our customers. As mentioned by Jack, today we have two principals with us from the Steelcase team to share their Work Better Global Report, which is a recent study gathering insights and data from 10 countries, 32,000 people, and an analysis of 8,000 space plans. So through this report, we'll hear about workers' expectations as they think about work in their physical space, and specifically how those expectations have shifted in many ways as the employees who left the office back in March return with a much different point of view about work, life, and purpose. So to introduce our guest speakers, I'm going to turn things over to Brian Wilkinson with Steelcase.
Thanks, Chris. Hello, everyone. My name is Brian Wilkinson. I'm the Regional Vice President for Steelcase here in the Mid-Atlantic. And to cover the research topics Chris just mentioned, I'm pleased to be able to introduce Dr. Tracy Brower and John Hughes. Dr. Tracy Brower is a PhD sociologist studying the sociology of work, work-life, happiness, and fulfillment. She is a principal with Steelcase's Applied Research and Consulting Group and the author of a new book, The Secrets to Happiness at Work, as well as her previous book, Bring Work to Life by Bringing Life to Work. In addition, Tracy is a regular contributor to Forbes.com and Fast Company. John Hughes is also a principal with Steelcase's Applied Research and Consulting Group and has more than 20 years of global consulting and advisory experience. For much of the last 10 years, John has focused his consulting activity in addressing new ways of working and the challenges associated with adapting workplace strategies to reflect cultural differences around the world. Later, we're also going to be spending time with Amalia Mahar of Steelcase at our global headquarters in Grand Rapids, Michigan, where we will take you through a tour of an innovative new space that puts the design principles you'll learn about today into practice. So with that, Tracy, I'd now like to turn it over to you to share a summary of what we're hearing and what our research is telling us.
Awesome. Sounds good. Thank you for that. Thanks to Chris and Brian and Jack for the wonderful introductions. Thanks to Arbee and the Washington Board of Trade. We really appreciate being with you. You know, we are really optimistic about where we are. This will likely be the most significant reinvention of work in our experience. We can come back from the coronavirus. We can respond to what we've been through in terms of the pandemic. But our real opportunity is to accelerate from here, to go to some new places in terms of our businesses, our leadership, the engagement of people. And so we really look forward to that. Part of the reason it's such an opportunity is because the people are thinking so consciously about their work processes, about their work colleagues, about their work preferences, about their workplaces. And so with that level of conscious appreciation and understanding and awareness of our work, we can really accelerate. So we think it's probably not just about getting back to the office in whatever that looks like. It's really about getting back to better. And let us tell you more. One of the things that we studied in the research that both Jack and Chris mentioned is we asked people about their work from home. What do they love? What do they not so much? And they really said, as you can imagine, that they appreciated no commute. On the other hand, they felt a little isolated. People enjoy working at home in their fuzzy slippers, but they really miss their people at the same time. Other thing that's really interesting is that people both reported more productivity and less productivity at home. And one of the takeaway messages for us is that there is no one size fits all. You know, if I'm in a small Manhattan apartment with my partner and I'm facilitating online learning for small children and caring for elders, that's a really different thing than if I'm in an empty nest environment and a dedicated home office. So productivity was on both sides of the coin. But significantly, are you not able to see my screen right now?
No, Tracy, do you want me to? I have the slides up if you want to just tell me when to advance.
Yeah, that's really strange. Let me try one more time. Sorry about that. It went through the share process. Can you see them?
There we go.
All
Yep.
right. I'm so sorry. What would a webinar be if we didn't have a little technical issue, right? We just wouldn't feel right about it. So this is authenticity and reality in motion. So you can see on the left some of the things people liked and didn't like about working from home. And it was all about productivity on both sides of that coin. And as you can imagine, people want to come back so that they can collaborate, but they also want to come back so they can focus. Depending on that home situation, people really want to look to the office to serve multiple roles: collaborating, focusing, learning, socializing, rejuvenating. And people want to reconnect with their people in terms of the network and the team and the belonging. So one of the things that we learned from our global research is that we have kind of new expectations that we're facing for employees. There are 5 expectations that are shifting, and I'll unpack these for you a bit, but it's all about safety, kind of a table stakes, a threshold to entry. It's all about belonging and a feeling of community. It's all about people wanting to be supported in the ways that they perform best. And this is interesting. They also want new levels of comfort and control. You know, you think about working from home, and one of the things that we saw in our research was people said they liked the variety. Go figure. I guess that means you're moving from your kitchen island to your living room couch, but you can be where you want to be one way or the other. The other thing was about control. You know, interestingly, I can open my window if I'm a little warm, or I can turn up my lights, and people want those kinds of controls in the office as well. So comfort and control were important, but let's unpack a couple of these others. One of the things that we absolutely learned is that safety will be critical. You know, I love to relate this to the Maslow hierarchy of needs. We've all learned about Maslow somewhere along the way. And as leaders, we've spent our careers thinking about, do people have a sense of belonging? Do they feel valued? Do they have a sense of purpose? And those are absolutely the right places to focus. But many people have been bumped right back down to the bottom of that Maslow hierarchy, and we're worried about our physiological safety and our basic security in new ways. So you see some of the things that people absolutely want in order to return to the office. The other thing that I would suggest is that psychological safety is part of this as well. People are going to be adapting to getting out of the house, crossing that threshold in new ways. Even for people who didn't leave the office, as everyone else comes back, there will be adaptation. And people will have differing layers of vulnerability or different perceptions of their own vulnerability. So it will be important that we emphasize also psychological safety. Team members who know you well, team members who have your back, colleagues who appreciate you and allow you to bring your best because you feel safe in order to do that. But like I said, safety is table stakes. These are the things that are going to be absolutely critical to people being able to re-enter. But what will really energize and motivate them is a sense of belonging. This is one of the things that we've been seeing is that mental health issues have escalated, senses of isolation have escalated. We're really, really missing our people in a macro sense as a society. The research that we did is super exciting. We asked people about the kinds of spaces that they really wanted, and then we asked them about community and organizational outcomes. And we found in the bottom circle there were 3 elements of the physical space that were really critical. One was about leadership presence and accessibility. People want the opportunity to be close to leaders, to hear leaders, to understand from leaders what's important, to rub elbows with leaders. Little did we know that phraseology would be so apt in 2021. People also want social spaces, places to connect, places to come together. And they want places that are stimulating and inspiring. You think about it, and our office experience, our work experience holistically has to compete with remote work, with work from home, and those will be the important things. Here's the cool thing about the data. When people reported having those kinds of places, they also reported greater levels of community, belonging, resilience, trust, inclusivity. And when people had those, they also reported greater organizational outcomes. They said they were more engaged, more productive, more innovative, more likely to stay with their current organization. This is important because how many times as leaders and decision makers are we saying, boy, where do we invest? In what baskets do we put our eggs to get the greatest payoffs? And we know that there is a relationship, statistically speaking, between place and community and the organizational outcomes that we want to strive for. The other thing that's interesting to think about here as we think about belonging and community is culture. How do we sustain and strengthen culture in a hybrid work environment? Culture has always been a critical element, and it's always been nuanced with huge amounts of variables affecting it. But one of the things we know is that proximity is key. Sociologically speaking, proximity is one of the #1 determinants of relationship. And proximity can be either real or perceived. There was a lovely PhD study that was done where we looked at follow-up, follow-through, and task completion with people across the company, across the nation, and across the globe. And there was perfect correlation in follow-up and follow-through to proximity. When people were closer together, they followed up and followed through with tasks more effectively. The trick in the study is that everyone was sitting next to each other in conference rooms. This is pre-pandemic. And so proximity can be either real or perceived. So our opportunity as leaders is to connect people through common purposes, to have leaders that are present and accessible, to relate team members together on tasks, to create that sense of proximity. Because the more we see each other, the more we connect, the more familiar we are with each other, the more we tend to be accepting of each other and able to really not only bring our best, but leverage the team dynamic and the key reasons that we have organizations in the first place, so we can excel, so we can collaborate, so we can innovate. The other thing to know here is that we are hardwired for connection. Our brains are absolutely seeking opportunities for belonging and community. And when we experience isolation, we see damage in terms of mental health and well-being and physical well-being and mortality and morbidity. And so there is absolutely a link between our belonging and our sense of community and our effectiveness in terms of the way we contribute and our happiness. People, when they are happier, give us more discretionary effort. They contribute more, they strive for greater goals, they're more likely to be learning, and they tend to actually be more successful overall. The hypothesis is that that optimistic piece tends to make them more likable. So proximity will be a really important part of the way we create community and belonging. And this is one of the new expectations that people have. Safety, belonging, and let's also talk about the social aspect of work. There are so many studies that have come out lately saying that people want to socialize. And I'm so sorry, but if I'm a business leader, I say to myself, what? People just want to gather around the coffee bar, or people just want to gather around the water cooler? I'm not sure how hard hitting that feels. I'm not sure how results oriented that feels. And I think that we need to deeply understand what we mean by socialize. This is the part that we're hardwired for. We gain key parts of our identity from the people that we work with. We identify with our colleagues. We get a sense of value from the work that we contribute to the greater society, to our organizations, to our customers. And social also has to do with learning. We learn best through our connections with other people. We grow best. Statistically speaking, your next opportunity is more likely to come from your secondary network or your tertiary network than it is from your primary network. So we need those primary connections, and we need those social connections that go out to secondary and tertiary. And the reason that's important to us is it helps us know how to get things done most effectively, most efficiently. It helps us make good decisions. And that adds to our happiness and fulfillment as individuals. It's also really good for companies, because if employees can get things done more effectively, more efficiently, with better decisions because they've checked in with their network and they have broad social capital and connections, that is a really good thing for results. So this is about social fabric, it's about social support, it's about learning and growth, both at individual and team and organizational levels. So there's a lot to be said for why we want the office. And we know that it absolutely will likely be a hybrid future, but we know that people want to come together for lots of really good reasons. Let's talk a minute about productivity. This is one of the other key expectations that people have coming back and returning to more of a normal state. And that is all about productivity. One of the things we asked people was, to what extent do you work from home? What's your frequency? And how satisfied are you with your home experience? So picture a 2x2. Any good researcher is using 2x2s somewhere along the way. What we found is that when people worked from home very frequently and they were dissatisfied with their experience, engagement dropped 14% and productivity dropped 12%. That's a very big deal. The other thing that we didn't have in our public report, but I'll share with you behind the scenes, is that innovation also dropped. So productivity is a big deal. When we manage change with organizations, even pre-pandemic, one of the number one things people say is, just don't mess with my performance. Don't mess with the variables that impact my ability to be effective. And so we know that people want to be effective and want to be productive. But let's think for just a second about productivity. This is so interesting. At the beginning of the pandemic, we heard all of this hubbub about, well, gosh, we're so productive in offices. Who needs offices anyway? We can all just work from home forever. But we know that that was likely panic productivity, people who were running in order to keep up because they were trying to be visible or they were worried about job security, and then they hit a wall. We know that people can be productive under the great circumstances they may have at home. People may be able to be productive with more routine or alone work. But when work is complex, oriented toward problem solving, oriented towards speed, those are the conditions where we really do best together. And where we keep people engaged, where people get that sense of fulfillment. The number one reason that people stay with an organization is because they have a best friend at work. And so connecting and having people feel engaged in their work and engaged with their colleagues is a very big deal. And we do that significantly face to face in an office together. And there are some key design principles. We want to fully accommodate individuals, give them flexibility, make sure that we're adjacent in terms of the spaces that are both open and enclosed, and that we're braiding the digital and the physical. And Amalia will talk more about this. But one of the things that we also know is that hybrid work is likely here to stay. And so John's going to talk a bit about that.
Thanks, Tracy. That was fantastic content you took it through. And I want to say hello to everybody. It's a pleasure to speak to you today. One of the biggest topics that we see in the workplace today is the whole topic of hybrid working. What I'd like to do is just spend a few minutes talking about that. And when we think about hybrid, it generally is about some blend of people working from home and in the office. And often when they're in the office, not everybody necessarily owns a desk. Next slide, Tracy. So I want to go back to some of the research that Steelcase did, and it's represented by the graph that you see here on the right-hand side. And what this represents is the preferences of people across the study with regard to where they work. And that big blue slice of the pie represents 54% of the people. And what they're really saying is they'd like to spend the majority of their time in the office. A day a week or less at home would be fine, but they want to come back. Now, conversely, we have 46% of people, the other two slices of the pie, that are looking to spend more time working from home. And the COVID pandemic has created a situation where working from home has become more viable. Not only are people interested in it, but more than anything, leaders have recognized that people can work from home effectively. And as a result of that, they're more open to that. But I also want to say hybrid is not a new topic. Hybrid has been around for 40 years. Companies in the US have been implementing it for at least 20 years. And there are downsides to it. So this whole concept of working from home, it has been in place before. And I think if we all remember back around one of the last major recessions, you read articles about Best Buy and Yahoo and other organizations that found when the times were tough and they needed to be productive and they needed to be innovative, they brought those people back to the office. Next slide, Tracy. What this slide does is revisit your either high school or college math course, because yes, this is a normal distribution. and what it represents are three natural groupings of companies in North America and how they're thinking about their workplace strategy. So each position represents a unique workplace strategy. On the left-hand side, we have companies who are saying, when this is over, we're going to bring people back to the office as is. Now, that doesn't mean they aren't making some changes for safety and things related to that, but they're not making a lot of changes. And that's 23% of companies out there. On the right-hand side of the diagram, you see companies who've made a decision. We don't think we need an office. We think virtual is good for us, and that's what we're moving forward with. And that's roughly 5% of companies in North America. These tend to be small to medium-sized companies. Many of them are technology companies. But what's sitting in the middle, that massive big hump, represents the companies that are thinking about hybrid working. And that number is 72%. And in fact, that number could be higher than 72%. Now you might say, is that a big deal? It is, because prior to COVID, even though hybrid had been growing rapidly for years in the US, we're not one of the leaders globally. We are a bit of a laggard, and the number was around 10%. So this represents a huge increase. And what's important to note is that hybrid is a broad continuum. There's not one answer to hybrid. There's this huge range. And at one end, on the conservative end, it represents a company who's letting a few people work from home, sometimes a few days a week, and when they come to the office, maybe they don't own a desk. All the way over to the other end of the spectrum, to one major organization that I'm talking to, and they're literally having 50% of their people work from home all the time. 35% of their people will be more mobile in the office where they share desks, and only 15% of people will actually be residents or own a desk. So there is this broad range there, and there's a lot of questions to answer with regard to that range. Next slide, if you don't mind, Tracy. So what this slide represents is another way of looking at the range of choices that a client has. And we're here to say, there is not one choice for you, there's many choices. And the challenge we're starting to see is quite a few companies are starting to talk about hybrid, and they pretty rapidly reach a conclusion without really exploring what are the other options available to them in the implications. And so this is a model we use in clients with those kinds of a discussion. Down at the bottom is as is. It's the base case that you compare from. Refine represents minor adjustments to that organization's strategy to implement basic elements of hybrid, then redefine as a greater move into hybrid, and then transform as yet a greater move into hybrid. And what our research tells us is where you end up along this continuum, there are at each point very unique impacts on the experience that your people have, the productivity that your organization is able to maintain and realize, and finally, the requirements for your real estate portfolio. So we're encouraging people to think through what are the options you have. And then a final point I want to make is lower levels of change, you can define that direction and move forward into design. If you're up towards the top, there's quite a few questions that have to be answered after you get the big picture. Mobility profiles, personas, sharing ratios, I-to-we ratios, that without that strategy being defined, your design firm is going to have a very difficult time putting a design together for you. Next slide, Tracy. So when we think about hybrids, one of the things I want to mention is there's not a single method for developing hybrid. There's actually at least 6, and I suspect there's more than this. And I want to touch briefly on each one of them, quickly define it, and give some perspective. So a lot of organizations are out there are using job descriptions, and they're looking at job descriptions to make the determination, how many days does somebody spend at home versus the office? And usually it's 2 or 3 days at home, 2 or 3 days in the office. So it's not overly complex. The problem is this: our job descriptions rarely describe what we do and how we do it. And more importantly, personality differences between one person and another reflect that those job descriptions aren't always as accurate as they could be. Another approach that many companies are using is staff preference, and they're literally going out to their people, asking what their people want, and within general bounds, allowing that to happen. The advantage is it keeps everybody happy. People get what they want. But some companies are making major real estate reduction decisions based on that. 30, 40, 50, 60%. And what do we know about people's preference? It changes over time. And what we're encouraging people to do is sure be thoughtful about this, because you don't want to make a decision today that 5 years from now, when people's perspective changes, you're left in a position trying to undo that. Leader preference is another approach quite a few companies are taking. And I'm working with a healthcare company right now that in the admin areas, they've got 6 leaders. One leader has decided, my people don't need to come to the office, we're going to be virtual. At the other end of the spectrum, the leader wants everybody in the office. Well, the problem is, number one, the head of real estate is pulling her hair out saying, how in the world do I manage this? And the HR head is looking at this saying, we have a bit of an equity problem here. We're creating a situation where there's a perception of haves and have-nots, and that's a bit of a challenge in today's environment. The final point on this page are clients that this approach, hybrid, has been around a long time. And they're saying, we don't have to get the perfect solution. We're willing to take some rules of thumb and apply those. And I'm working with a large company now they have 1,000 people in their technology group, and we're applying rules of thumb, helping them think through a hybrid solution that would work for them. Next slide, Tracy. So the 2 forms of developing hybrid strategies that we think are the most effective are listed on this page. And the primary reason we believe that they're most effective is that they're based on some actual representation of what people do. It's not based on opinions. It's not based on preferences. And they're quantitative approaches and data driven. So you can be sure that they're going to work. The first choice is doing utilization studies, where basically you study the time that people spend in their desks and how they cycle within an office. The challenge with this is nobody's in the office, so you can't do that today. But there's a long history associated with this and a lot of data that sits behind it. Probably the most exciting topic that we see out there today, and it's an area that Steelcase is doing a lot of research and development on, is really around personas and work modes. Really taking time to understand the work patterns and the activities that people do on a day-to-day basis and how that ebbs and flows. And then using that information to engage with leaders to help them make intelligent decisions about time people spend at home. You want concentrate time maybe spent at home, but not collaborate or innovate time spent at home. So that's what I had for you, just as a quick touch on hybrid working, and I'd like to pass it to the next speaker now.
John, thank you. John and Tracy, thank you so much for that. Before we go over to, or up to, I should say, Grand Rapids to visit Amalia, I wanted to open up the chat for a Q&A. So if anybody, we have a couple of questions. If anybody has any questions before we move on here, please use the chat function. One question that we do have here is, what is the status of co-working space in the new office reality?
I can jump in on that one, John, and then do you want to add to it? I think we're hearing a mix in terms of organizations wanting to use co-working space. One of the things we hear as an advantage of co-working space is the flexibility and potentially the proximity to people's homes, so that maybe they don't have to make the whole commute to the hub location or the headquarters location. The other thing that we're hearing, though, is lots of companies are saying, oh my gosh, I'm struggling with morale, I'm struggling with culture. We feel like our culture is potentially deteriorated over time, and we really want people to be together face to face in our facilities so that we can build that culture together. So I think we're hearing a mix in terms of co-working spaces, but definitely a role to play. But John, I don't know if you see that differently or what you would add.
No, it's pretty much the same thing, Tracy. I don't see a major change. I do see, though, that with people working from home more, there is going to be that focus to have them in their facilities so that they touch base with their people. But I don't see that it going away. I really don't.
Great. Great. Thank you both. One question that I had for both of you is, I know that you've both been working in this space for a long time. And I was just curious, going into this and after the study, you know, what was your biggest surprise?
You want to go first, Tracy?
Yeah, wow, that's a really good question. You know, I think the really interesting thing is the productivity question, you know, like the extent to which people are having really different experiences from a productivity standpoint. I think the other thing is the extent to which the office still matters for lots and lots of different kinds of work. I think at the beginning of the pandemic, we were seeing people say, oh, we can do all of our focused work at home and we're going to do all of our collaborative work in the office together. But we know that the office has continued needs to fulfill, and that we are hearing and seeing business leaders really recognize the importance of the office for things like innovation and engagement and retention. And so this office being on the radar screen as a really important part of strategy and thinking holistically about the work experience, I think has been especially intriguing and interesting, and maybe surprising as well.
And I think the thing that's been most surprising to me is that this isn't the first study we've done. We've been doing ongoing studies over the life of COVID. And what's interesting is that the rate of change in people's opinions and companies' perspective, that at first there was very little change. Then there was a lot of change. There didn't seem to be a lot of agreement. Then there seemed to be coming together ideas about hybrid. And what we're seeing now is the next sort of iteration of the research, where a lot of people want to work from home. I think that the jury is still out as to what the ultimate outcome is, because a lot of the people that I'm talking about, they love working from home, but they really hate not being back with their colleagues. So the longer this goes on, I think we're going to continue to see some shifting in perspective in general.
Great, thank you. And we've got a couple of other questions here, but we'll have about 15 minutes towards the end to answer those and any others that folks would like to put up into the chat. So thank you, John and Tracy, for that. Amalia, I would love to turn it over to you now to give us a tour of the space up in Grand Rapids.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Hi, everyone. I'm Amalia. I'm here in Grand Rapids at our Global Business Center in Grand Rapids, Michigan. But for the first few years of my work with Steelcase, I worked and lived in Washington, D.C. So this is a nice connection for me. It's a delight to be with you all. And the space I'm about to show you is our IT organizations area of our business center. And it has a lot of high tech. It's a different look. And so hopefully that you'll be able to squint and see some spaces that can scale to what you're thinking about. But this is what's working really well for us. So we wanted to be transparent about that and show you examples of where the principles that Tracy and John were talking about are manifesting in our space. So here locally, the COVID numbers have been up and down. And so the space that you're about to see is going to look pretty quiet. This was filmed when most were at home. So I just wanted to let you know at the peak, we've had about 80% of our colleagues on campus, but currently about 25. So it's quiet in the video, just to set your expectation. And our IT organization really was moving from waterfall process to agile process. And so the space needed to shift with that as well. So you're going to see a lot of spaces that are different variety of privacy for people to come together depending on what they're working on. And in this case, you're at the front porch of one of our agile studios. So a great place for a digital braided presence. Someone could be calling in while others are physically in the space, place to throw up the document and review the digital information. The presence of sanitation supplies. So whether people use them or not, it is that psychological safety of the space going through as well. And different postures for people to sit in as well. So this front porch is just like in housing design, the entry point to the team's own space. And each of these teams throughout this wing have an opportunity to express that too. So places to get together, maybe host someone that's not on the proper team without heading into the team space, but it's right there adjacent to where everyone is working without having to take up a conference room that other people are vying for throughout the wing. So you see all these different postures, all these different options, digital, analog opportunities, and then some of the examples of our agile. And I know Chris and Brian, you guys interrupt at any point if you see anything coming through the chat.
Amalia, this is Brian. One of the questions had to deal with this braiding of people who are in person and people who might be still remote. And so one thing I want to point out is as you look at these applications, many of them do include a technology element where if somebody is coming to the meeting from home or from a third place, they still have a seat at the table in the meeting, in the decision-making through the use of bringing technology into these front porch areas.
For sure. Yep, for sure. So just as the numbers were reflecting what Tracy and John were talking about with people on campus or not. So more examples of options for the hand sanitizer and surface cleaner, et cetera. So here's examples of where teams are working, and the stripe of gray carpet in the forefront, if you're looking, none of these spaces are owned. But beyond, back towards the window, all of those are owned by teams. So if I'm a customer of our IT organization, I might set up camp here to be adjacent to the people that I'm working with. But it's still a place for me to focus as an individual and get my work done and still have access to everybody. Here's a little bit more privacy. Part of our Brody station, a bit of horse blinder so you're not distracted by movement moving around. or places to sit shoulder to shoulder with people. In the center, you see the cafe that you're passing. So a neighborhood cafe, little piazza for people to come in and grab a cup of coffee, run into someone maybe you don't know yet, but you start a conversation over something nonchalant like coffee, and you have an opportunity to get to know someone. So trust building opportunities as well. So that's a social opportunity to chat. This is one of our garden spaces. So where can I go to get away and not be distracted, not be interrupted? And this is a space along the windows. It has some green space, and it's all set up for the individual to camp out, whether it's just to get the email done between meetings or to camp out for the day. No one owns these spaces. So we've got conversations amongst the neighborhoods that I don't get to put the picture of the family up on the desk. I have to clean up on my way out at the end of the day, but it's still an option for anybody, whether you own a space or you don't. Height adjustable workstation. So Joanna, who's sitting there, can kick her chair to the side and stand for a portion if she wants to. And then different layers of visual privacy too. So as we keep going through the space in this garden, here are some of our brodies. So this is a nice opportunity to sit where you're really enveloped by those horse blinders. There's an opportunity to put your feet up in these one-person pods. There's a tablet for your active work, something to the side for anticipated work. There's a place to put your bag that's up off the ground, and power and personal lighting as well. So if we move from the garden over to these enclaves, so a lot of this wing is wide open with lot lines so that teams can move their pieces around depending on what they need through the day. Where do I go to get away if I want to shut the door? And all of these enclaves have different postures, different aesthetics, depending on what inspires you. You can see the pieces of paper on that lounge piece right there as gentle reminders to not sit next to each other directly shoulder to shoulder during these times. But all these different options for people to go depending on what they're working on, who they're working with, how long you need to be together. Do you need 4 walls and a door like this enclave, or like these guys? Are there even walls at all? So what do you need for what you're working on in the moment? Room Wizard, that red light allowed them to claim the spot so that they're not walking around looking for a place for the day. So that was a high level sprint through our IT organization spaces, but I'll turn it back to you, Chris, if there's any questions.
Yeah, absolutely. If anybody has any questions for Amalia on what you just saw up in Grand Rapids, please feel free to put those in the chat. One thing, Amalia, that I was curious about is, you used to host multiple groups every day up at Steelcase. So is customer traffic or individuals wanting to come to your space, is that increasing? And if so, why do they want to come up? What's most important to them right now?
Yeah, I think the numbers, and rightly so, the COVID numbers were giving people pause. However, we're still flying our corporate jets. So we're still hosting customer groups in Grand Rapids, whether they're flying on our corporate jets, coming up commercially, or driving. And then similar to this experience, we're hosting clients virtually as well. So max of 90 minutes at a time. You can imagine people's attention span on these meetings. And for people to come up in person, it makes such a difference for me to be able to walk our guests around. And we are at good capacity right now hosting people. It gives people a chance to actually sit in the space themselves and envision what it might look like for them or their clients, and to talk to colleagues. So give me the real scoop, like, why are you working here today? Or why didn't you choose over there? All those different conversations, and connecting with our leadership while they're in town and having those dialogues. So what's been your experience, Chris, when you've brought groups to Grand Rapids? What's been the pro versus a call like this?
Well, as Tracy and John talked a lot about, the big thing is proximity to people. So we can bring people in and have a really deep dialogue with Tracy when we're right there in person. On top of course, seeing physically how all of these spaces and all of these products come together.
More than a 10-minute overview for sure.
Right, right. One other question that I had for you, Amalia, was just around utilization in general. We saw a few people sprinkled throughout the space. What is Steelcase seeing right now in terms of utilization of your office?
Yeah, this week it's been, I think in the 400s out of 1,200-ish people on our campus. So our model shop, our test lab, our innovation center, and other spaces where people are really working with their tools as opposed to based off of a laptop, that's been steady. So at minimum, 25% of our campus is populated at any time. But at the high point, I think I said earlier, it's like 75%. So people are really excited overall to get back to the campus. They miss their coworkers. They miss the conversation, that sense of belonging that Tracy and John were talking about. And so we're seeing that start to trickle back as vaccines, have become accessible to the whole population here in West Michigan.
Great, thank you. And from the chat here for everyone, I'll start with a question around hybrid and team meetings. So the question is, what is the impact of hybrid working relationship on team meetings where some staff are on site and others are remote? What is the impact on staff engagement? And what are some best practices for maintaining high levels of engagement and participation among all staff on the call?
Tracy, do you want to get that one?
Oh, sure, absolutely. I think we are absolutely seeing that we need to be so intentional about what work we do hybrid and what work we don't. And I think that's a different intentional discussion than what needs to be face-to-face and what can be remote. And so that intentionality is key. I think when we're not intentional and when the work and the process are not adequately supported by hybrid, we risk people disengaging. I think the other thing we need to think about are new protocols for the ways that teams interact. How do we invite people into the conversation if some are hybrid? How do we make sure that we are thinking consciously about our team processes? How do we make sure that we are being inclusive? I think too, there's a really new, interesting way to think about social dynamics and transparency of schedules. Like if I'm going to make the commute into the office, I want to make sure it's on the day when Chris and Brian and John and Amalia are there. Otherwise, I might as well be on camera from home. But we don't want to be intrusive. I still have a private doctor appointment I don't need everybody to know about. So I think that it's going to be really important that we think about how we're communicating and planning as teams and how we're transparent about where we're going to be when, appropriately so we can really get the best out of the time that we spend and know that we can be supported with hybrid work in the processes where that works best. But what do you think, John?
Well, I wanted to add to that, Tracy, that this is one of the reasons that a lot of organizations are starting to look at work modes, because they are making the realization that if collaboration is the heart of what we do as an organization, it's how people learn and it's how we innovate, maybe we don't want those work modes to be high probability remote. Maybe those are the things that those are the activities and work modes we want people to come into the office for, because that face-to-face adds so much value. And where they're then starting to shift conversely is to say a lot of concentrate work is something that by default can be done at home. And using the work mode analysis, they're going to be prioritizing that kind of work activity to be done at home, but trying to pull people into the office for those face-to-face meetings wherever possible.
Thank you. Thank you both for that. Really good question here around talent. Do you think companies that don't adapt to a hybrid model risk losing talent and possibly falling behind?
I'll take that one. And I think that the answer is yes. And I've got a couple of specific examples of leadership teams that I've spoken to in your market within the last 2 weeks. I was doing a workshop with a fairly large technology company with the CEO and his direct reports. And he asked me that question. And before I could ask, I caught out of the corner of my eye the head of HR just shaking her head up and down like crazy. And all I said is, oh, so-and-so, you must have some experience in this. And then she launched into the fact that we've had a number of people leave the company recently because their competitors offered the opportunity to work from home or other places. So I didn't even have to answer the question. Then with another CEO and leadership team I was with last week, it's a 4,000 person research company, lots of PhDs, engineers, highly skilled people. And his comment to me was, within weeks of this beginning, I found out that several of our more senior people literally sold their house and moved. They moved to another part of the country. And he said, I'm faced with a situation where these people are hard for me to replace, if not impossible. And he said, I have to allow them to do this because if I don't, I will lose them to somebody else. And Tracy, I don't know if you've had similar experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting to think about short term and near term and long term on this. There's a wonderful phrase going around called Zoom towns, which I find to be so sticky, right? Zoom town is, I'm going to move to a market that's a much lower cost of living because I can work from anywhere. And so I think in the super short term, this will be really critical, and it'll be interesting to see how people migrate differently and sort of the social dynamics of how that happens. I think that the jury is still out on the medium term and the long term. And I'm right there with you, John, in terms of hybrid being here to stay. But in terms of the proportion of hybrid and the emphasis on face-to-face, I just wonder if we're at this pendulum swing that's going to come to rest a little more centrally. I was on a really interesting roundtable with CEOs recently, and this one CEO was really hard-nosed. I think his bark was worse than his bite, but he said, make no mistake, we are working from home because this is a pandemic response, not because we always thought this was the best strategy for our business. We want people to be working face-to-face. So I thought that he was really hard-nosed, right? As I said, and we know that people are very empathic toward employees and want to respect choices. But I do think that it's interesting to see where that pendulum might rest. I think it will be interesting to see how we start to meet people where they are. Like, we know that we're seeing this resurgence of kind of the employee experience, and choice and control, I think, are going to be the name of the game. Our research suggests that when people have more choice and control, they're more engaged. People want to have a variety of choices, and they want to be empowered to make them. So I think that'll be part of the formula.
And let me add a piece to that. You talked about pendulum, and with lots of organizations that I'm speaking to, what they view is where we were in the past, we're probably not going to swing back to that. But there's a real feeling that the pendulum has probably swung quite far.
Yes.
And what organizations are really interested in as they think about the workplace and what that new strategy would be, they want to create a strategy that has far more flexibility than they've had in the past, so that it can flex up to the point of this kind of extreme situation that we're seeing. But as the pendulum starts to swing back, they want it done in a way so that it can accommodate with low cost that adoption of having more people come back to the office, because it's going to take a while probably before we get an equilibrium, and we may not come to an equilibrium for quite a period of time. So that flexibility and that strategy and incorporating a lot of the elements of the model you showed is really important.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And another question here, good one, regarding the rate of change in perceptions. Do we have a long-term confidence that the public health realities, vaccines, variants, et cetera, will support the current planning and outlooks?
Yeah, I can jump in on that one. I mean, I think that the real key is going to be flexibility and fluidity. You know, like, we've seen such an ebb and flow of the virus. We just think we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, and we realize, nope, tunnel's longer than we thought. And so I think that to the extent that we can create work experiences with plenty of technological capability, with plenty of choice and control, workplaces with plenty of flexibility and fluidity, that is, changes that facilities make, and changes that employees can make. Plenty of variety in the campus. So if I feel safer in an enclosed space, I can do that. If I feel safer in a more open air space, I can make that choice. I think that kind of flexibility is going to be key, because we can anticipate, and we absolutely know that we're doing the right things in terms of, to the best of our science, to the best of our knowledge right now, how we create places that can be both effective and safe and compelling. I think that flexibility, that ability for us to respond will be key. And that needs to be built into the planning methodology and the vision for the space as well.
Yeah, great. And another question here. You mentioned that employers should approach a more flexible approach to hybrid working and their employees' preferences. Talk a little about how employers are approaching different work personality styles. Those who want to work from home 3 to 4 days a week versus others who would like to be in the office daily. Does that person who likes to work in the office still feel disconnected because their other colleagues work better from home?
John, do you want to start that one?
Yeah, I was going to take that one. So the thing I would say is this, it really comes down to what's the underlying strategy or approach that the organization wants to use when they implement hybrid. That question is relevant, especially where it's driven by employee preference. And frankly, we're not convinced from what we can see that that's probably long-term the best solution, because it's based on what employees prefer, with, in most cases, relatively little consideration for either how they work or, more importantly, what keeps them effective. And so usually we would say you're probably better off you doing something that's more like a utilization study or a persona study that blends into that some element of how that job is not only done, but how it should be done to be effective for the organization. So it mitigates that to a certain extent, Chris, in how it's approached. Tracy, any comments on that?
Yeah, I do think it's interesting to put on the table that dynamic tension between individual needs and preferences and team and organizational needs and preferences. Like, I would love to sit home, as I mentioned, in my fuzzy slippers every day, but that may not be the best choice for my team and for our company and the results. So I think we need this open dialogue about how we make those decisions together. And I also think that we need to create a bit of FOMO, right? Fear of missing out. Spaces are so compelling that I go in because I want to see my colleagues. That has career implications, right? Like visibility, learning, growth. Those are going to happen when we're face-to-face together. So I think we have an opportunity to create places that are compelling, where people want to be, and to give options as well, and hopefully have more time together face-to-face than less.
Yeah, fantastic. So one more here. If you're a CEO that's making decisions that have regional impacts or global impacts on your employees and real estate footprints, how does all of what we just discussed, how do you frame all of that? How do you make the right decision for your organization and to meet the needs of localities, but also do something that you can manage on a global or regional scale?
It's a good question. Can I take a crack at that, Tracy?
Of course.
We've worked with a lot of companies in the last 20 years that have implemented strategies like that. And there are ways that tend to work better than others. So there's a large telecommunications company that's based outside of the US that what they did is they developed for their headquarters company a hybrid strategy that worked for them. And it's really based on how people work, so usage of seats. And we also know, and there's a lot of research that Steelcase has done, that each country, people have different preferences for how designs are implemented. And with this client, what we spent our time helping them with is they went to Germany, for instance, and did an operating company's headquarters there. They allowed that solution to flex somewhere between 15 to 25%. Based on the realities of that country. So part of our work was engaging with their people, understanding what their issues and challenges were in that country from a culture standpoint, and then helping that client make an intelligent adjustment to that strategy. Then we did a similar effort in South Africa, a similar effort in Singapore. So that is, I would say, best in class on how some organizations have gone about doing it. I've seen companies implement the same pretty much everywhere in the world, other than dictated by product and application restrictions, which are different in regions of the world. And I've also seen companies implement strategies that are country specific. And the first example that I gave was the one that I've seen by far be the most effective.
Great, thank you. And it looks like that is all of the questions that we have today. One last note. So thank you, Amalia, Tracy, and John, for all of your insights there. One last note here is that we would like to continue to be a resource to all of you on the phone today or on the call today. We know that this is just the beginning in your journey to making decisions about what the best approach is going to be for you and your organizations. So there's two things that we'd like to offer. One is a return to work survey that helps you pinpoint specific areas of focus that are important to your employees in your organization. The second is a concept review, which will take your existing floor plan and look at the applications within that floor plan and go through a consultation around maybe where there might be opportunities for changes or improvements to better align your real estate strategy with the needs of your employees. So if you are interested in any of those things, look for an email, which we will be sending out following today's webinar with my contact information. Thank you again to everybody for the opportunity today. Thank you to the Board of Trade, and everybody have a wonderful day.